What's up everyone? In this episode of Motive Garage presented by Sparesbox, it's time to get serious with our R32 GT-R project car. Now, if you've been watching our channel for a long time, you'll know that I've been trying to perfect our GT-R into the ultimate street GT-R, something that is fun, reliable, responsive, and drivable. And it does all that. In fact, it's probably the best 9-second GT-R I've ever driven in terms of being an overall package. But now, I'm going to ruin it. Well, some people will argue that point. Some will say I'm going to ruin it, some will say I'm going to make it better. But it's time to step things up a notch with our GT-R. I've been driving, watching, filming, and been part of all these huge monster GT-Rs for so long, it's about time that I personally had a 1,000 horsepower GT-R. Now, there's two ways to go about making 1,000 horsepower in a GT-R. You can either put on a turbo that just makes it and squeeze the crap out of it with big back pressure, heaps of boost, or you can go up a couple of sizes and make that power easier. Now, my attitude is this: if I'm going to make the car laggier anyway, well, I might as well put on a turbo that can make the 1,100 to 1,150 horsepower at the hubs that I need to run a high 8. I might as well have that extra headroom so that the engine does it easily and efficiently. So that's why I've chosen the G45-1500 with a T4 twin scroll 1.0 rear housing. Now, if you want more info on the G45, look through our YouTube channel. We have done a full review on the G45 and G40 range of turbochargers, but I've picked the G45 just to have that headroom to make the power that I want. And what's probably going to happen is I'll probably enjoy it as a monster for a little while, and I may go back to the G40 later. But for now, I wanted to see what big turbo life is all about. So we need to remove the old G35050. I've got a 6-boost T4 twin scroll manifold designed for the G45 to go on an RB30/26. I'm going to dummy fit all this up myself here in the studio before it heads over to CRD so they can fabricate the new dump pipe, new intercooler pipe, intake pipe, and get it all running and tuned. Let's go, let's do this. 1,000 horsepower, here we come. So when going from G35 to G45, we need to change exhaust manifolds. Why? Well, basically, when you have a G35 and an RB3026, you can use the same manifold because it still clears and doesn't hit anything. But when you go to a G45, it's a lot bigger, and if we try and use our old manifold, this one, it basically, well, hits the rocker cover, hits the strut tower, hits everything. And the other thing is we're switching to T4 twin scroll. Why? Well, I'm going to want every last bit of response I can get with a turbo that big. So basically 6-boost have made us a whole new manifold. And this is a manifold designed for RB30. Basically the taller block obviously raises the head up higher, so they make the runners a bit longer to help lower the turbo back down and help offset that spacing. They've already done a flange for a 60mm gate. Hopefully that fits. It is a pretty tight fit because a 60mm gate is massive. So CRD are going to have their work cut out for them to get a screamer done in there, or they might relocate the gate. We're not sure yet. Obviously, we've got the T4 flange to suit the T4 housing. One other little thing we have to look at is we're going to have to grind the engine mount down just that little bit to give better clearance between the bottom of these runners and the engine mount. And obviously then CID will work out the fabrication for the compressor cover and weld an elbow on there, because the compressor cover on the G45 is huge and gets very close to the manifold and the chassis rail. So there is actually a fair bit of custom work going on here to make this work, but that's pretty normal when you're building cars that make over 1,000 horsepower. Let's go. Well, I've done everything I can do here at Motive HQ. I've dummy fit up the manifold and turbocharger and removed a lot of things out of the way, ready for the fabrication work. So now it's off to Croydon Racing Development so they can work their magic with the fabrication and we can get the car running again. Let's go. Usually our first drive is really exciting, but I think this one's going to be massively frustrating because we put a whole new turbo on it, and obviously when you change rear housings and change turbos, the tune changes. So Con basically said, if you need to drive it to go do stuff, you're fine, but you can't thrash it until we tune it, and that's gonna suck. Well, the finished product in the engine bay is a work of art. The bay's not finished though. We are going to be testing a lot more products in that engine bay and we'll be changing the fabrication work as we go. But I needed to take the car out of CID to go get the new livery put on by All Stock Up before it gets back to CID to get tuned, and hopefully we crack that 1,000 horsepower mark. Well, the results of the G45-1500 are in, and I'm going to say this, I am massively impressed. The bigger rear wheel compared to the G42 clearly works, because this thing, it made cracking 1,000 horsepower look so easy. You might think to yourself, oh yeah, but it's called a 1500. Of course it can do that easy, but you have to remember that the rear wheel has a lot more to do with how well these engines perform than the front. And the rating is for the front wheel. We've got the smallest rear housing, 101, just purely for response and drivability to begin with. And I'm going to be honest, my target was purely for now, just to crack 1,000, so that we could start comparing products, intercoolers, inlet manifolds, etc., rehousings, and we've got a lot of product to test before we try and wick it up a little bit further. And I'd rather have a car that drives around on, 1,050, 1,060 all day, every day, than one that's squeezed to make 1,300 and the block will crack after a couple of months. So my target was to make in the thousands, but do it easily, reliably, and be able to drive it around like that. And that's what we've done. 1,044 horsepower, on 31 pound of boost with the air filter on, the exhaust flapper valve closed, and exactly how I drive it. And if you don't think that's enough, then you clearly haven't driven a legit 1,000 horsepower GT-R. This is going to be crazy fast. My goal is to crack 160 mile an hour and drive home in exactly the way I drive it, and I think that will do it. We did make some more power with the air filter off and a turbo guard on and the flapper valve open. We'll get to that in a minute. First up, let's take a look at this. The first thing I want to discuss is the boost curve. You can see our boost curve, rather than just go as fast as it can up to that 31 pounder boost, you can see that Con has made the boost come up to about 25, rolls it over, and then feeds more boost back in up top. Now what this does is a couple of things. If we didn't have a wide journal crank and a Nitto Stroker in it, we would probably tell you that we're trying to conserve the bearings down low. But with this car, that's actually not really the case. We can handle plenty of torque down low. This is actually about drivability. So the shape of this boost curve is what's making the power curve linear. So rather than have your old school big turbo power curve where it kind of comes on, hits really hard and then tapers off, we've got a nice linear power curve, and essentially what that's going to do is give the car drivability. What's the point in having 1,000 horsepower as soon as it comes on boost, it just blows the tyres off? And let's face it, a lot of GT-Rs have been tuned that way, and without drag radials, they don't go anywhere. I want this car to be able to use 1,000 horsepower on the street on a road tyre, and that's a big ask, but I'm pretty sure we can prove that we can do that. I mean, I'm going to need a drag radial to run a quick time, of course, but I don't think we're going to need a drag radial on the street. Some of the things we did discover, back pressure-wise, we had 10 pound of boost less back pressure than boost pressure as we're working our way up in power, right up until we cracked 1,000 horsepower. And even then, we only got exhaust gas back pressure that got even close to 1-to-1, pretty much in the last sort of 800 RPM of the power band. On this power level, we did find that with 31.5 pound of boost in, we only had sort of 15 to 25 PSI back pressure all the way through the rev range. And then right at about sort of 8,400 RPM, the back pressure would go up to 35 PSI and basically 1-to-1 back pressure just in that last bit of the rev range. And what does that tell us? It tells us that the rear housing is probably choking the car at that high RPM level and that boost level. So if we want to make significantly more power than what we are now, we are going to need to change the rear housing. Yes, we could squeeze more boost into this, but like Con said to me before we started tuning, we're not chasing a number, we're chasing a happy spot for the engine. And if we have less back pressure than boost pressure for most of the rev range, then the car is nice and efficient and we'll be able to make this power and live a long, healthy life. But if we start squeezing boost up to 40 pound of boost and start having back pressure of 50 or 60 PSI, the engine's not going to be as efficient, it's just not going to last as long as there's so much strain on the engine. Like I said, this was about making a reliable, drivable 1,000 horsepower that does it easily. So at this power level, back pressure only goes over 1-to-1 and only by a couple of PSI right at the very top of the rev range. Had about 3 PSI pressure drop on 800 horsepower. And if you look here, we haven't got any pressure, we haven't got a lot of pressure drop yet. It's not until we get up around here that we're seeing a little bit over 2 PSI, even up at sort of like past 600 kilowatts, which is where it used to be. You can see the pressure drops back to 3 PSI, just like it was before at 600 kilowatts. And even right up the top, the most we're really seeing is a slight bit over 4 PSI pressure drop. So 100 mil thick intercooler on over 1,000 horsepower from Hypertune is only getting 4 PSI pressure drop at that 1,040 horsepower mark, which is pretty impressive. Intake air temperatures on our logs, we don't have the fast reaction aftermarket intake temp sensor, but we didn't see anything over 50 degrees intake air temp. So the intercooler's working by pressure drop and cooling, so I'm pretty happy with that. So, torque. We've got over 900 Newton meters pretty early in the rev range. Ignore this RPM scale, it's not correct. Where this one says 6.5 is probably more like 9,000. At about 4,500 RPM, we're already making sort of like over 500, well over 500 Newton meters. But where it gets into the meat of the torque curve, we've got over 930 Newton meters for a big, big RPM range. So we're at 931 Newton meters of torque here, which is nearly as much as it used to make completely. And now our peak torque is up over 1,200 Newton meters at the hubs. We've got like 25% more torque than we used to have. And we've obviously got a very big torque band in this car. So I'm really looking forward to showing you guys what this thing drives like both normally and flat out. So there we go. That's how we drive it, Trim. Con did actually add a couple of degrees of timing on a run and saw 1,070 horsepower with the air filter on and the flapper valve closed. But we decided to just basically leave it like this, 1,044. It's not worth the extra strain, but we can make more power if we want to, but honestly, let's just go have some fun with it like this first. So the next thing we're going to look at is how much power the car made in race trim, which is with a turbo guard on instead of an air filter, and the flapper valve opened. Now, the big thing that happened when we opened the flapper valve is the boost control in the mid-range actually went a bit crazy. So Con had to change the boost map to suit the flapper valve being open, which basically means we can't just open it any time. It needs a different map for race trim and road trim. Now you can see all this extra boost in the mid-range here, which is what changes the power curve, and a little bit more boost up top. So at peak power, we're talking 31.4 versus 33.1. So there's almost 2 pound of boost extra here to make that sort of extra 50 and a bit horsepower. What does that tell you? Well, it means that the turbo is reaching the end of its efficiency range using that exhaust housing, because another 2-pounder boost only made like another 55 horsepower, which is still pretty good, but like I said before about back pressure, we are seeing back pressure spike up in that sort of like last 500 to 800 RPM. So when I do want to do a Hail Mary pass when the car's teched and we want to go in race trim, we do have an extra 50 horsepower up our sleeve. But to be honest, I think with this rear housing, we're probably not going to see a whole lot more than 1100 unless we want to squeeze on it past its efficiency range. So future things could be that we change rear housings. We're obviously going to be testing different intercoolers and inlet manifolds, but right now I want to maximize this turbocharger setup with this rear housing. So you'll probably find 1100 horsepower is probably as far as we're going to go with this current turbocharger setup, but we will test some other products. As you can see, pressure drop still pretty good on the Hypertune intercooler up top. What are we talking? Sort of 33 to 37. Yeah, still only 4 PSI. Torque changed obviously as well. Boost is up, so torque is up. Now we're talking more like 1330 Newton meters of torque. Like, that's mental. Like, now we're sort of at 30% more than we used to have before. So, and you can obviously see the boost curve here obviously correlates to the extra power here. So it will be faster like that, but my goal first up is to drive the thing on how I drive it on the street to try and run that number. If I can't get an 8 on 1044, well, it's a little bit extra there to help push me over the line. So that's the difference between street and race trim on our GT-R. So this is the bit that I find the most fascinating, the comparison from the G45-1050 versus the G45-1500. Now, essentially, these two power curves are what I call the sweet spot for each turbo. On 800 horsepower, the G35 was right in that perfect sweet spot, where after that you started not really making a lot of power for each pound of boost, and the G45 is in the same spot. This is how I drove each car, I guess, on full power, 800 versus 1044. So if you have a look down the bottom of the graph here, you can actually see the G35 had a little bit more boost to start with. It has like 7-pounder boost versus 5-pounder boost. And what that does is, if you start with 2 pound more at the start of the run, you're going to have a little bit more everywhere as you're first coming up onto boost. So if you have a look at the data at the bottom end of the curve, you can see the G35 started with a couple of extra pound of boost, but the G45 had caught back up by about a third of the way through the dyno run. I don't have the exact RPM, but probably by about 5,000 or a little bit over 5,000 RPM, the G45 has actually caught up to the boost of the G35. And then you can see here they've got very similar boosts as they start to creep up a little bit, and then the G35 tapers off, sticking it around about 23 pound, while the G45 keeps up and going up top here. So obviously expect the power to be higher up here. And obviously this is map 2, so you can see the pressure drop. But if you have a look at the torque curve down here, you've got 620 Newton meters with the G35 down here, and you've got about 100 Newton meters less, maybe 120 peak between the G35 and G45. So horsepower is about 50 horsepower difference. Will you feel that on the road? Well, of course you will, but 50 horsepower, sort of below 5,000 RPM, let's face it, in the big scheme of how much power we're making, that's not a lot of power to be at a deficit for a turbo size that's so much bigger than the G35. So drivability down low, I'm pretty sure the G45 is still going to drive really well. I mean, it ain't going to accelerate at 2,000 RPM in 5th gear the same way the G35 did, but in regular driving, I'm pretty sure the down low stuff, it's not going to be terrible on the G45 and nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be. I thought my dyno graph was going to be more like, you know, the blue line would come down here and then spike up and then get that power up top. But we've actually got the same power between the 35 and the 45 by halfway through the run. So probably at about 5,500 RPM, I'd say thereabouts, as a rough guess. We've got the same power and the same torque. But have a look at this. Have a look how big that area of torque is, where the G45 is making way more than the G35 here. And then you can see, obviously, there's way more power in that same zone. Now, you're going to say to yourself, what does that mean in the real world? Well, our car has a 6-speed sequential. So where is it going to live most of its life? It's going to live it here. You might say, oh yeah, but the other one makes more power down low and that's where you live. Yeah, fine. Driving normally, or maybe if you're doing a tarmac rally event, down here is what matters. But we want to run an 8-second pass, and we want a car that's just fast and fun. And when you've got a sequential, this is where you live your life. You live it all above 5,000 RPM, if anything over 6,000 RPM. And once you're up in that part of the graph, we've got an extra couple of hundred Newton meters and a couple of hundred extra horsepower everywhere. So this is in kilowatts, this number here, but look at this point here. You know, you're talking, like this thing is tapped out at 800 and we're getting up to 1,044 here. So a lot of this area, you've got anywhere from sort of like where it crosses over here, you just got more power, more power, more power the whole way. So in terms of real life correlating horsepower difference into acceleration, where we spend all of our time in our GT-R up here, it's got more torque, it's got more power, it's going to be a faster car. What about with the G45 set at roughly the same power as the G35? And that's what we've got here. This is a run with the G45 on approximately 22, maybe 21.5 pounder boost, making 822 horsepower versus 805 horsepower that we made with the G35. And check this out, like have a look down low and all the way up here, they've got very similar power curves from about halfway through the run. We're actually not losing that much down low. Like you're talking 40 kilowatts, so maybe 70 horsepower maybe, and then you're talking 100 Newton meters. So you'd feel it, but it's not ridiculous. Like most people would think this turbo change, I'm gonna go from a nice responsive GT-R to a laggy pig, but we're not. Like have a look at this. This is incredible how similar the power curve is up top and obviously down low. Now you're probably asking yourself, how come the boost isn't much different? Well, you got to remember the G45 on 21.5 pound, it ain't trying yet. It's not even into its efficiency zone. Well, the G35 was right at the end of its efficiency zone on a 3.2 litre. If it was a 2.6, that would be a lot higher boost. So let's have a look at the boost levels here, pretty much the whole way. It's about a 2 PSI difference in boost the whole way down. And right at peak power up top, you can see it's, yeah, similar, even less than that. So 2 PSI less to make pretty much the same horsepower. Doesn't sound that good, but obviously you can keep putting boost into the G45. So basically what this tells me is I can drive around my GT-R on 22 pound and make the same power as before, but just do it way easier than it used to. So still pretty impressive stuff comparing these graphs. And as you can see, not a lot down here that's lost, and this is very, very impressive for the G45. So I'm gonna set the car up to have adjustable boost maps. I'm probably gonna have, you know, full power, wastegate, and a couple in between, but the power I'm probably gonna drive around on is this one. 26 pounder boost, 905 horsepower. That's probably where I'll drive it on the street to show you guys what it drives like. It means it's got more power than before, so I can put up with a little bit of loss of down low. But as you can see in power curve, yeah, man, it's going to be awesome to drive. But this is probably the power level I'll spend most of the time on, because 900 horsepower on 26 pound, that is very, very easy power to make, and it's going to be a very fast car on that power setting. So we thought it would be interesting to compare the power curve to another brand of turbo, and a very popular one on a 3.2, which is a 7685. I don't know what rear housing was on that, but it is bigger than our G45, so you'd expect it to make more power. Why? Well, the 7685 has a bigger rear wheel, this one has a bigger rear housing, so you would expect a little bit more power. The engine on this particular car is pretty much the same as mine. 3.2, big head, all the fruit. And you can see down here, the G45 does come on earlier than the 7685, so we do have more bottom end. Now, the boost curve isn't on the dyno screen because it was all logged in the Motec, but we can tell you that the boost curve in that was more aggressive than ours, which explains the extra power here through that top end, which is where we basically showed you that we control the boost curve to make it more linear. So this has more of a normal big turbo, comes up, levels off, while ours is more linear. But they pretty much have almost identical top end power. They're both around the 1,050 mark. That does it on 1 pound less, according to this, on 30 pound versus our 31. So 7685 versus G45, this isn't the perfect example, but I guess in the real world, looking at these curves, you can see the G45 does come on earlier, and that's about all we're going to compare is that bottom end. But up top, if we were to put more boost in up top and through the mid-range, we could obviously make similar power in that area, but the peak power is almost exactly the same with 1 pound extra boost. But that bottom end drivability is what's going to make it a fantastic turbo. Now, we all know that discussing the dyno graph and talking about numbers is one thing. We need to see what the car is like in real life. So the first stop was GT-R Festival. Now I'm going to get the GT-R owner's excuse handbook out for a minute if you want to look at it that way, but bear with me. The first problem that I had was I only got to drive the car home from CID in peak hour traffic and drove it to the event under the cover of darkness to hide its new livery. So I didn't really get the chance to test the car out too much. I gave it one little hit on about 920 horsepower, which is level 4 on my boost controller out of 5. So then when we got to the event, after we unveiled, I was all excited, went and got the car scrutinied, and this is where things went really weird. A fuel pump relay died, which made the main tank empty itself, the car shut off. So then I rewired the fuel pump, got that all working again, but then we had to bleed the mechanical fuel pump because there was obviously air stuck in the tank and the lines. That took a little while. Once that was sorted, got it started up, perfect, let's go. Turned the car off to go get ready, and then basically came back and the starter motor died. So I got push started in the pits twice, thanks to the guys from B2R, that was pretty funny. But then the problem from that is, if I can't turn the car off and turn it back on again, then I can't put it into two-wheel drive to do a burnout because we have a factory four-wheel drive system with just a spliced-in controller. So when we go from two-wheel drive back to four-wheel drive, we have to turn the car off. So no warm-up burnout, no practice, and the car hasn't got two-step set up on it yet. So I basically thought, you know what, I'll just give it one Hail Mary pass and see what happens. Now with the track that sticky, even with 8,500 RPM on takeoff, the car still, I guess, went to take off, gripped up, bogged down and came back on again. But here's the thing, it actually came back on pretty quickly. Obviously affected my ET, but I was actually pretty surprised that it was still a 9.8 second pass after bogging down. So it shows how well the turbo comes back on. The other thing I did is I forgot to turn it to level 5. So the 155 mile an hour matches perfectly to that power figure. Our goal on the full 1050 is a little bit over 160 miles an hour. So even though I wasn't happy with the pass, at the same time, I was happy with the pass because it validated the power level of the car. So the next stop for our GT-R is one-day power play at Sydney Motorsport Park. We're not going there to race anyone as per se. We just want to go out in the cruise sessions and give this thing some hits on the full 1,050 horsepower, as I haven't had the chance to try it on the street, and it's a much safer option to try it out at Power Cruise. So we're going to go there, give it some hits, get some logs out of it, make sure the car works as well in real life as it did on the dyno, and take you guys for a ride. Let's go. We'll turn it up? Yeah. Turn it up, 1,050. Is it? Is it? Now it is. That's 1,000 horsepower now? We're on 1,000 now.
It does it flawlessly.
Yeah.
It doesn't miss a beat.
It hooks up.
And now it's just like...
Now we just... And now we can just...
Dude, I think this is one of the fastest cars I've ever been in.
In real life, as in putting it down, it would be.
I've never felt something like that.
Yeah. I've been trying to tell our viewers, and you can tell them now, that it's one thing to have 1,000 that goes sideways and burns the tyres off and goes everywhere. But to have 1,000 that you can so easily put down.
Well, that's the thing. Like,
it did wheel spin a little bit in second. You feel it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Like for a second, though,
for a moment.
The second you clicked over, it just kept hauling.
No misfires, no out of shape, no torque steer, no moving around, no nothing. Just dead straight.
Well, the Motive DVD Skyline is not one to with, is it? Holy shit. Take the win for today. Officially my favourite car.
If you're going anything that fast today,
I know I won't be.
All right, Chris, you're the first passenger in this setup. I know you've been in some fast stuff, right?
I have. I've been in many, many 1,000 horsepower cars. But this fucking thing was just next level, dude.
All right, what separates this car from your average 1,000 horsepower car? Like, what is it?
You didn't smoke the tyres on top gear, first of all. You actually got traction, second of all. And you actually hurt my neck. Like, you actually sprained it.
It's good,
hey. I've honestly never felt a Skyline, or actually a car, just go bang, 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 bang. And it wasn't even like a drag strip. Like, it wasn't prepped street or anything.
Yeah.
It was just a normal racetrack. And it just, dude.
It's something else, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's something else.
The Motive DVD's Skyline is, yeah, no around, that's for sure, too.
You ready, Mark?
I forgot I was videoing. Jesus. It did 100. Oh, holy shit. 100 to 200 was 3.5 seconds. So, Mark, passenger reaction. How was it?
Yeah, like I was videoing. I forgot I was videoing. I was trying to press the imaginary brake pedal.
The first hit was pretty brutal. You've been in sick cars. Where does this sit? Like, I know you've been in things that probably technically make more power. Where does this sit out of like power versus how fast it actually goes?
The only comparable vehicles I've been in are those Team Insanity GT-Rs over in America.
Yeah.
But they're DCT, so they don't have that
aggression.
Yeah, between shifts on this, the whole car's bucking. It's like it's trying to lift the wheels on every gear shift. It's wicked.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But but I know you've driven some stuff, so
No,
yeah.
This is
It still gave you a little fright.
Yeah, it makes me feel like my 600 horsepower and my 34 is boring.
It's because it is, mate.
So it's all well and good to analyse dyno graphs, but what's it like to drive in the real world? Now, before we go for a drive, let's get one thing clear. Other than serious time attack guys, anyone building a 1,000 horsepower GT-R is not building it to do hills runs or circuit or motor car, and we don't need to look at the response down low really all that much. What we're about is big top end power and getting down that quarter mile and making the car nice and fast. The other thing you need to look at is the GT-R from factory is actually a pretty laggy thing. They don't really do most of their work until over 4,000 RPM. So we're not going to sit there analysing all the little data down low at 2,000 RPM and when does it make full boost in second gear and things like that. It's just more about, is a GT-R with over 1,000 horsepower in this day and age a laggy pig like they used to be? Because the old days of T88s and T51Rs, if you took off in first gear and you bogged down a little bit, it took a very long time to get back on, and they weren't very nice to drive. So I figured the best thing to do is jump in the GT-R and drive it from home to work and see, can you live with this car driving around on the street? So, let's go. First indication of how it drives is pretty good. Obviously the 3.2 litre has a lot to do with how well the thing drives down low. Even if it had no boost pressure down low, a 3.2 litre is obviously going to be a hell of a lot better to drive than a 2.6. And I will say this, if you want to have a 1,000 horsepower GT-R that you drive around on the street, I'd go on RB30 block personally. The extra torque and drivability off boost is so much better for driving around town and makes the car much more pleasant to drive.
Yes, I know that 2.6, 2.8 litres do sound better at big RPM, but RPM is super expensive. You don't get to use it on the street very much. So if you have a look, we're cruising around, 50 and 60 zone. I don't need to go back to first or anything silly like that. I can let the revs drop below 2,000. I can drive around very normally. We do have positive boost pressure probably as early as 2,000 RPM, but obviously it doesn't reach full boost until more like 5,000 RPM or a little bit over, depending what gear you're in and how much load there is on the engine. It changes in every gear. But you can see here, into a roundabout, let the revs drop down to like 1,200 RPM a second. You can drive the car very normally. Like I said, it's not going to exactly be great for a hills run, but if you went for a drive in this as a passenger, or even just got the chance to drive it, you wouldn't pick it as being a G45. It feels like something smaller. Like this thing probably drives better down low than old school 2.6s with old GT35s on it back before the GTX range. Like, it really is actually totally fine to drive around. I mean, 2,000 RPM, fifth gear, 60 k's an hour, cruises along very nicely. I'll give you some quiet, just show you what it drives like. There's a tunnel up here. Got to do the right thing, right? If you want to get moving in this car, it doesn't take much. I will admit that if you're doing, 3,000 RPM in fifth gear and you stand on it, it's going to take a little while. But if you're rolling on in first gear and hit it, man, it's on super quick. And right now I'm driving around probably on, 680, 700 somewhere. It's only a tiny bit over wastegate pressure, maybe 16 pound of boost at the moment, but it's still pretty snappy and fun to roll on in first gear to get moving. So I'll take off from this roundabout. As you can see, if I want to get moving in a hurry, I can. I was worried that it was going to be all in or nothing. I thought I wouldn't be able to short shift and just, be able to drive the car. If you're going to pull out in traffic, or you want to get onto an on-ramp, get moving, but you don't want to be balls to the wall. I was worried that this car was going to be all in or nothing, but it is drivable on lower power settings quite nicely. I thought it would be, if I put it on wastegate, it would just be a dopey pig and I'd hate it, but to be honest, it's pretty good to drive. If you think that you're going to daily drive this thing, or that it should be capable of daily driving, I think you're kidding yourself. A 30-year-old Japanese import with this sort of power and development and modification list, if you can afford to build this, you can afford a nice daily driver to drive every day. This is your weekend car. It's something you savour. It's like owning a classic car or an old muscle car or an exotic. You don't drive it every day, you drive it on the weekend. What matters with this car is, could you jump in and go for a cruise with your buddies on a Sunday afternoon? Yes, you could. Can you drive it to the track? Yes, you can. I drove this to roll racing last Friday in the rain and peak hour traffic, and the car was totally fine. I'm not going to pretend that it was super comfortable and fantastic, because let's face it, I have a sequential transmission, twin plate clutch, harness, race seat, roll cage, like it's a pretty serious thing. But in the big scheme of things, to have a car of this spec list with this power compared to what would have been built like this, say 10, 20 years ago, it's pretty damn good. I'm able to drive normally in traffic and talk to you guys on camera at the same time with no issue. So I think that proves my point that with modern turbo technology, E85 fuels, modern ECUs, and everything we've learnt with GTRs, you can have a 1,000 horsepower GTR that you can drive around. I'm not the first to do it. There are other workshops that have built plenty of 1,000 horsepower cars that are driving around and have been for a couple of years now. For us, this car wasn't just about making 1,000, it was making 1,000 horsepower reliably, easily, and still being a decent car to drive on the street. And out of all the GT-Rs I've driven, this has probably got to be, out of all the ones I've driven on that sort of 1,050, 1,070 mark, this is the nicest one to drive that I've driven. And one of the biggest indicators of how good it is other ones like this I've driven, when you turn them down to 600 or 700 horsepower, it's almost laughable. You're almost like, man, this thing's too laggy to be any good on that sort of power. It's like, if it ain't on 1,000, it's not even worth doing. So I was really worried that this car was going to reach a point where it's either all in or just drives slowly. There's nothing in between. But what this car has proven to me is that you can short shift and ride the torque wave and the thing's not terrible to drive. So I'm only a little bit off wastegate pressure right now. As you can see, I don't need to be all in to enjoy the car. I can just give it a little squirt, and it's still all right. Don't get me wrong, I prefer a big squirt, but let's face it, we're on a public road, so I can't go crazy. Here we go again. I'm actually super impressed how quick this thing gets on in first gear. I would never pick it as a turbo this big. The long first gear in the PPG box actually kind of suits it, but normally that long first gear makes them pretty laggy and lazy, but in this thing, man, it's on quick. So there you have it. A drive to work in my GT-R shows you that you can have your cake and you can eat it and you can have fun with it and hopefully not put on any weight either. So yeah, G45-1500 with a 3.2, that's a combo. What a combo.
So in summary, I'll say this. I am massively impressed with the G45-1500 on our 3.2 Nitto Stroker kit equipped GT-R. And you know what? So is Con from CRD. He usually uses Garrett's more for circuit stuff on lower boost settings, and he did say that he was mega impressed with how well the Garrett G45-1500 performed. But the big question is, where to from here? Well, I have mentioned to some people that I actually wanted to try out the G40 later because I thought the G45 might be a little bit too lazy for my liking on the street. But I take that back. It's awesome. I love it. Even on the lower power settings, it is incredible to drive and a whole load of fun now. Finally, this GT-R, I can actually give it a hit and often on the street bail out early and get the shakes from just how exciting it is. So happy that the car is now at that level. But the benefit is all the development we've done to get here means we have great advice to give you guys. So what's next with our GT-R? Well, that's the smallest rear housing you can get for that turbo. So we'll be looking at testing different rear housings to see if we can make a little bit more power and easily. We're going to be testing a single throttle drive-by-wire hypertune inlet manifold. We're also going to be testing the IEE drive-by-wire 6-throttle manifold kit with enlarged throttle bodies and a hypertune plenum on it. We're also going to be testing a thicker intercooler as well. So we're going to look at 100 mil versus 135. So there's still a lot of things to test that were better being tested with 1,000 horsepower than what we could before on 800 horsepower. Because a lot of those products, people will say, don't bother to 1,000 horsepower. So we're going to do some more myth busting with our GT-R very soon. So make sure you subscribe, and man, we've got some good content coming.